Hello, everybody. We still have a few people logging in, so we're going to give everyone a few seconds to get settled, and then we'll get underway. Thank you for joining us. Okay. All right, I think we should be ready to go. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We have over 200 guests from over 30 countries joining us for our essential talk, Contemporary Past, Curating Archives and Collections for the Present. Before introducing you to our esteemed guests, please allow me to cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar is being recorded. We will be able to share a link to the recording at some point next week. We also invite you to ask questions by using the Q&A button, and please use the chat button if you have any kind of technical difficulties regarding the webinar. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Patrick Flores, Ben Cranfield, and Rosie Ram. I'm going to hand you over to Rosie, who is going to start today's conversation. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this in-session event on Contemporary Pasts, Curating Archives and Collections for the Present. My name is Dr. Rosie Ram, and I'm an Associate Lecturer in Curating Contemporary Art here at the Royal College of Art and course leader of the Curating Contemporary Art and Design short course programmes. Today's event has been coordinated in conjunction with a new short course that we are delighted to be launching this autumn, the Curating Contemporary Art and Design Archives and Collections Intensive, which will explore contemporary curatorial practice and thinking around the ways in which historically activated, encountered and interrogated within the current moment. This new course has been developed from the long-established Curating Contemporary Art and Design Theory and Practice Summer School, which is designed and taught in synergy with the Curating Contemporary Art programme, featuring sessions with curators, artists, researchers and writers from across the School of Arts and Humanities here at the RCA, leading professionals working in the field, and many MA Curating Contemporary Art alumni who are actively shaping the ways in which curating is thought and practiced across the globe. And something that we've noticed throughout so many of the discussions during this short course over the years is a real appetite for examining archival materials, objects from collections and notions of history, but through the prism of the contemporary, and using experimental curatorial methodologies to do so, to really grapple with the question of what archives and collections might do or do differently in the present moment. And it was these conversations which spoke to my own research interests, as well as to my colleague, Dr. Ben Cranfield, that inspired the development of the new Archives and Collections Intensive and stimulated the thinking behind today's in-session event. And so with that in mind, we are truly thrilled to be joined by Professor Patrick Flores, whose curatorial practice and engagement with archival materials and with histories Ben and I both deeply admire and are very much looking forward to discussing and reflecting with you all. Patrick is Professor of Art Studies at the University of the Philippines, Curator of the Vargas Museum in Manila, and Director of the Philippine Contemporary Art Network. In 2019, he was Artistic Director of the Singapore Biennial, and in 2022, convener of the forums for the Taiwan Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Patrick's publications include Painting History, Revisions in Philippine Colonial Art, Past Peripheral, Curation in Southeast Asia, and Art After War, 1948 to 1969. And today, Patrick will be in dialogue with Dr. Ben Cranfield, Senior Tutor in Curatorial Theory and History in the Curating Contemporary Art programme at the RCA. Ben's research is focused on the relationship of the curatorial to notions of the contemporary and the archive, asking what it is to be with one's time, which stems from his ongoing work on the histories of art institutions, the theory of archives, and shifting ideas of art and culture, with recent articles including On Not Being With Time Queerly in Post-War Britain for Performance Research in 2018, and Mind the Gap, Unfolding the Proximities of the Curatorial in 2017. And before I hand over to Ben to open up today's conversation with Patrick, I just wanted to encourage all of you, as Joe said, please post your questions for our two speakers as they come to mind using the Q&A function on Zoom. We're going to have around 20 minutes or so for an open discussion with the audience in the latter part of today's event. And I know both Ben and Patrick will be really keen to engage with all of your questions. So do post these as they arise. And without further ado, I'll hand over to Ben to open the conversation.
Thank you so much, Rosie, and welcome to you all. And another big thank you to Patrick for joining us. As Rosie said, it was a great thrill to us when Patrick accepted our invitation to speak today. It's quite unusual, I think, to find someone who is operating at the kind of advanced edge of curatorial practice and also having written so extensively on art and cultural production at the same time, whilst also being a director of a museum. So, you know, there's a really interesting kind of nexus of concerns that we hope to kind of tease out a bit today. I wanted just to kind of say something, I guess, about this title that we chose both for the short course and today's session, Contemporary Pasts. It's a bit of, I guess, a provocation. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot over kind of the last 5 to 10 years about what it means really to produce the contemporary moment through not only the curation of contemporary artists, but also through an engagement with materials that have been produced at other times in other places, something that I think that you do engage with very particularly within your curatorial practice, Patrick. And I guess in some ways, contemporary past is also a provocation or a kind of question about what is the function of contemporary curating contemporary art as a space to respond to or to challenge perhaps dominant forms of historical imagination, particularly, I guess, the traditional forms of museology or traditional forms of historiography. And how do we understand that kind of stuff, how the way in which the stuff of the past, as well, its kind of materiality as well, constitutes our present? And I guess one of the things that I was really struck by looking over your curatorial practice is the constant engagement with history and with different ways of kind of thinking about history. So I wondered, how do you think about history in your curatorial practice? And how do you, I guess, locate the contemporary within and through the historical?
Yeah, so thank you, Ben, for the invitation, and thank you, Rosie, too. It's a pleasure to be here in RCA. Ben gave me 3 difficult questions, so I try to sort them out, in the best way I can. To answer the first question, Ben, I'd like to look at the latter part of that question, which has something to do with the figuring of the contemporary through the historical, right? And counterintuitively, for me, it is through art history. So if this is a specific kind of historical time, art history. So counterintuitively, the contemporary figures through art history, how the contemporary is absorbed. It's absorbed in the modernist continuum that is self-renewing, as in the MoMA model, and also how it separates through the colonial critique of the modern, and I'm specifically invested in the colonial because I worked on my thesis in art history was on colonial art in the Philippines. So I look at modernity and maybe the contemporary through a theorization of coloniality. So the colonial critique of the modern might take the form of the post-colonial, right? And we know that, and also the decolonial. No? So for me, I think it's not a choice of one or the other, but a coming together of both the post-colonial and the decolonial, some gesture towards an imbrication with the colonial, and also an inauguration of a different condition as prefigured by the decolonial. I think the two should be together. No, it's usually the decolonial has taken some kind of ascendant stature now, but I think this relationship between the decolonial and the post-colonial has to be foregrounded more, so that we get, I think, a fuller picture. This is based on my experience as a student of coloniality from the perspective of the Philippines.
Just
Yeah.
kind of on that point, I guess, thinking about this this move to the decolonial, but not forgetting, I guess, the kind of the process, if you like, of post-coloniality, and where history comes up in this. I was really struck within your curation of the Singapore Biennial, how you bring in historic figures, not just as a kind of reclamation of their work within the contemporary moment, but as a way to kind of interrupt, or if you like, or to produce that kind of crisis that you talk about there between the decolonial and the post-colonial. So, for example, you know, particularly I was interested in your bringing in of Raimundo Albano as not as a printmaker and as an artist, but also as a curator, and his curatorial projects, and particularly you drawing on the group exhibition that he curated in 1977, Roots, Basics and Beginnings. And I wondered what that kind of revisiting within your own curatorial practice kind of does, what the sort of productivity of that is.
Well, I look at the contemporary as part of a long duration of the modern. So it's not entirely a rupture, right? So I look at like the Albano moment within the Biennale moment as a reference to the long duration, which connects the contemporary moment with a wider maybe latitude of reference in history. The same way that I use a quote from a woman revolutionary in the 30s, to frame the not really the theme of the Biennale in Singapore, but the ethos of action. And this comes at a time when Singapore was celebrating its bicentennial of colonialism. So I wanted to complicate that, in a way, commemoration in Singapore of colonialism as a passage into the modern, with a more revolutionary consciousness of a rebellion, partly organized, partly led by a woman seamstress in the 30s in the Philippines. So that kind of mingling of time and also of agents, so that Salud Algabre, the author of the line, becomes contemporaneous with the art of the Biennale, and that the art of the Biennale is historicized. It's historicized through Salud Algabre. So I think this is the legacy of art history too. Is the procedure of art history to always like historicize artistic material on the one hand, but also aestheticize historical form. So I'm interested in that, and it's embedded in art history as a procedure. And I think the contemporary would prompt that procedure to emerge, and to be complicated in the present. Yeah.
So, I mean, I'm very interested, I guess, in the way that you're sort of using and thinking about art history here, because it's not necessarily art history, perhaps, as everyone would imagine it, because it's not necessarily the invocation, perhaps, of a kind of canonical lineage, nor necessarily is it about trying to place or kind of map individuals within a kind of structure of kind of art historical succession. Rather, there's a kind of constant need to contextualize and historicize cultural moments. And I'm thinking here, for example, of your work around, say, the formation of the Cultural Center of the Philippines as itself a kind of product of a particular historical moment and a particular kind of way of thinking, and then how that becomes a space through which people can also contest, perhaps, the kind of given meanings within that. And one of the things that I guess was very notable to me was that you're not just invoking histories or using existing artworks, but you're taking particular kind of material fragments here as well as starting. I guess one of the things that was very interesting to me when I was reading about your own writing around the Singapore Biennial was your kind of starting of the thinking through these particular dioramas that were displayed in the National Museum of Singapore in the 1980s. So I guess kind of I wondered how something like that operates for you as a kind of way in or a kind of leverage point within your curatorial methodology or within your thinking.
Yeah. So that's an interesting question, Ben. In art history, we always struggle with this binarism between form and content. So I look at the curatorial method as trying to as a way to overcome and surmount that obsession with the binary. So like the archive and, let us say, contemporary form, or the theme of the Biennale and the materialization in art. So what I tried to do in Singapore was to imbricate. And the diorama presented an interesting moment of imbrication in which the history of Singapore would play out in craft. In craft, wood carving from the Philippines. The craftspeople who did the dioramas were Filipinos. So in one moment of the representation of the nation state, you embedded in that moment is already migration, right? Migration of labor. So that is an archive in itself. And so I didn't want the archive to be merely illustrated as some kind of content, as opposed to a form, that makes it possible. I'm interested in imbrication. So this is one form of imbrication. The other would be the choice of certain key artists in the Singapore Biennale who embodied this imbrication as well, like Carlos Villa, whose practice in San Francisco and the Bay Area in the 60s and 70s created a community, of an assembly, an assembly of a gathering of people in an increasingly multicultural society, but also increasingly racist one. So I'm interested in this, that the Biennale as some kind of assembly or gathering would also find itself in the production of practice, like the practice of Carlos, and also the production of form, like the congregations of Alfonso Osorio, who did these assemblages of different materials. So I wanted those moments, to surmount the binary. Yeah.
It's interesting you talk about the idea of kind of assembling and gathering, maybe not just materially, but also of kind of people and moments, because I was quite struck by your approach in the recent Taiwan presentation at the Venice Biennale, to think about the archive, and just for those who don't know, that this year's Taiwan presentation, Impossible Dreams, revisited the previous editions of Taiwan in Venice through a kind of archival display in a fairly traditional way, but specifically we're curating these forums that took place that used the kind of archive or a way, or the question of that moment of looking back as a way to ask some kind of questions in the present. And in your introduction, your essay around that in the catalogue that accompanies that presentation, you talk really beautifully about the seminar as a space, and you quote Roland Barthes there about the seminar being a space of production of difference. So I guess what I'm also kind of wondering about is that relationship between the archive as a kind of material historical base and the conversations that we might have in the present, and how that kind of took shape maybe through these forums that you constructed.
Yeah, that presentation wanted to implicate both gestures, no, Ben? The archive, which was a survey of the participation of Taiwan in Venice, which is interesting in itself because of the complications of representation, right? So it is also a history of representational problems. Taiwan being not allowed to call itself a pavilion because of the protest of China, right? Although it was first invited in Venice as a pavilion. So on the one hand, there was this archive of participation, and then second, a seminar, a digital online seminar of issues around matters arising from the archive, meaning the issues presented by the artistic material itself. No, so this is an interesting relationship, but it was not a programmatic one, meaning we didn't really we didn't aim for one-to-one correspondences or direct convergences between artistic material and issue, but I think the condition was created in the pavilion. But I have to say, Ben, that this was a plan B in the pavilion, because I was tasked to curate an indigenous artist, Sakulyo. I was appointed artistic curator, as curator for the pavilion in 2020, but the issue was that the indigenous artist would have been the first time that Taiwan would be represented by an indigenous artist, which was for me a very exciting moment. But the indigenous artist was accused of sexual violence, and so the Taipei Fine Arts Museum had to disengage with him. So that's why this was we thought of a plan B, and this was the plan B. But in retrospect, in a way archivally, because this is already now part of the archive of the pavilion, the presence of Sakulyo, the indigenous artist, would have complicated that history of participation. Now, not only because of the indigenous moment, but of the I think the third exclusion of represented by the artist. Of course, the first exclusion is that Taiwan itself is excluded from the pavilion system. Second, the indigenous is excluded from the dominant Han Chinese ethnicity in Taiwan, and then of course the third exclusion is the on the grounds of sexual assault. No, so for me, that is an archive in itself. No, some kind of an impossible pavilion, no, or a pavilion that is not yet possible. That's how I construed the word impossible in the title. Yeah,
and absolutely resonates with a kind of notion of the archive then as less of a space perhaps of historical evidence, but maybe more of a space of sort of unfinished stories or you know, short branches in a way. And you know, and as a series of possible routes or paths that one can go back to and kind of follow or think about the kind of what if. And I guess what's interesting there is one starts to then tip into a territory where one's thinking about fictions. One's thinking about how one sort of tells stories with and through the archive, and the kind of and a kind of playfulness, but a very quite a serious playfulness. And I guess that makes sort of, I was thinking back to your earlier work in Venice, curating the 2015 Philippine Pavilion, where you used this kind of recovered film, this Genghis Khan film from 1951 that had been part of the Venice Film Festival, and sort of used that as a way to locate both kind of geographically, both in terms of the Philippines and also in terms of Venice itself, but also as a way, in some ways, to, I guess, start to kind of operate this dialogue between the stories of nationalism, nationhood, etc., as fictions within the time frame of the contemporary of the pavilion itself. So I guess I sort of wondered to the extent to which these kind of fragments that form this kind of expanded notion of archive are themselves kind of provocations to tell other stories, or to tell it, or to expose as well kind of operative fictions.
Yeah, I like your use of the word fragment, no, to describe the archive, and it resonates with me. Like we should look at archival materials as fragments, no, not really like cohering into some kind of continent, no, of data or information. I look at them as more as like islands, no, islands constituting an archipelago, no. So so I like that idea of the fragment. And in the Philippine Pavilion in 2015, I wanted to at the outset move away from the binarism of the local and the global, you know? And so the Genghis Khan moment was, you know, was, I think, the perfect way to demonstrate the, you know, that the local global binary is not tenable, no? Because the film was done in the Philippines in 1950 and screened in Venice in 1952, and it talks about the early formation of the global world through the conquests of Genghis Khan. So I think at the outset, one cannot say that this is just a local film, no? And also one cannot say that it's, you know, only a cosmopolitan film. So yeah, the film in itself complicates the geographies and also temporalities. So if I think that speaking to your question of fiction, right? Of imagining the story of a place, or imagining the condition of time, no? So I think yeah, and mingled with Genghis Khan, of course, were installation and a moving image that spoke to the geopolitical dispute in the South China Sea. So I looked at the pavilion as part of the conversation of the long duration of conquest, right? From the period of Genghis Khan to the current expansion of China in the region. So, but through the mediation of film on Genghis Khan in the 50s in the Philippines, and contemporary work from the Philippines. So the contemporary biennale, or the contemporary pavilion, emerges from this activation of historical material. No? Yeah.
And it seems something I mean, I hope I'm not kind of overstating the possibilities of curating or the curatorial, but it does seem to me that that in difference, say, perhaps to the way that your writing operates in a more kind of historical or art historical vein, there does seem to me to be something about the way in which you're approaching the curating and the curatorial, which is playing with the affordances of that space. And you use the phrase I've seen a number of times about reworlding. And I guess I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm imagining that when you're talking about reworlding, you're also connecting that to something else you said, which is that you think that Southeast Asia must be geopolitically unburdened. There's a kind of way in which a kind of regionality needs itself to have a space of kind of reworlding, or needs to have a space where it can tell different sorts of stories. So I mean, this is quite a broad question, but I guess I wonder what for you the curatorial or the space of curating offers to that idea of reworlding, or offers you as this opportunity around kind of reworlding.
Yeah, first it's reworlding in the sense of finding a way out of the art world. So that I think curatorial work enables us to find exit points away from the art world as it is bureaucratized, no? So I think that's first thing, that the social world of art is bigger than the art world as we know it. So I think curatorial work allows us to do that, and I tried to do a bit of that in Singapore Biennale by involving communities of practitioners outside the Biennale circuit. No? So secondly, because I'm a student of art history in the region, I also wanted to unhinge the imagination of the region from geopolitical terms. So reworlding means looking at a wider context for nations or localities, or even let us say regions to come together, no, outside the auspices of geopolitics. So in place of geopolitics, I propose geopoetics, no, meaning that the place also the place defines the art, but the art also defines the place. No, so that is, I'm guided by two quotes generally when I curate. One from Foucault, the phrase "sudden vicinity of things." I'm interested in the vicinity of things, but also in the suddenness, meaning the surprises or maybe the jolts also of coincidences, or and so on and so forth. And of course, the poetics of relations of Glissant. No? So I'm interested in those, is in this suddenness and also this relationality. So I also try to expand the notion of Southeast Asia through a project called South by Southeast. No, so there have been two iterations of this. First was involving the first one involved art from Southeast Asia, so it always involves Southeast Asia. But I look at a coordinate elsewhere, and then the first iteration had Southeast Europe as a coordinate. So I brought them together, no? Art from Southeast Asia and Southeast Europe. I'm interested in Southeast, not only the South, but Southeast, which is not the center twice, no, not North, not West. No? And then the second iteration involved artists from Southeast Asia again, but and in relation to South Africa and the Caribbean, which is southeast of North America. So those, and the Taiwan Pavilion also afforded me to look at Southeast Asia in the context of a larger Austronesian matrix. No? It's interesting too, and that it's, Taiwan and Philippines can be together because they are usually seen as like belonging to different regions, right? The Philippines belongs to Southeast Asia and Taiwan to East Asia. But if seen in another world, or if re-worlded, then they can be together within a larger Austronesian context. So something like that, Ben. The curatorial allows me to do that, and also enhances my ability to create a different art historical geography. Yeah, because I haven't abandoned my work as art historian, so I continue to write art history even as I curate. So the relationship between art history and curation have produced, I think, a different practice that cannot be reduced to one or to either of the terms. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll move in a moment to see if there are questions from the audience. I just want to ask one. I mean, it's a big question in a way, but just to kind of, I just want to bring it in because it's another part of your practice. When you're talking about the sudden vicinity of things, this sudden relationality that can be produced through curating, and then also, I guess, kind of open up or a questioning of existing kind of geopolitical delineations through this, again, this kind of production of originality that happens through the act of curating and happens through the bringing together of objects and people. One can see how that happens through kind of temporary events and biennials particularly. But I'm also interested, that you are also a museum curator, and that you look after a collection. So I guess kind of just finally, I just wondered whether there's anything to kind of bring in here about how that suddenness can still operate within what's often seen as a very kind of known and not sudden duration of a collection.
Yeah, I was about to mention that too, Ben. It's my day job, so I have to to reference it. The contemporary also figures through the institutional memory of the institution. So the institution has a memory, so that's historical, no? And that is indexed by the history of the collector, the history of the collection, and also the history of exhibitions within the institution. So the contemporary, because in the Vargas Museum we have contemporary art programs in relation to the archive as well as the collection. So always they are seen in dynamic interaction. No? So I think the contemporary becomes possible to some extent in the modern time of the University Museum. The University Museum is a unique institution because it embodies two exemplary legacies of modernity: the university and the museum. No? So the University Museum, the contemporary becomes part of the modern time of the University Museum, and in a way that modernity can pressure the contemporary to critically think about itself. So in a way, that modernity, the reflexivity of the modern is redistributed across the contemporary. So it's some kind of a productive moment of the modern in relation to the contemporary, because the DNA of the museum is modernist, right? As an institution. So yeah, I'm interested in that, in how we produce contemporary curatorial efforts within the collection, and also the biography of the collector, who is very interesting person. He was a politician who served in two colonial governments of the United States and Japan. He was an avid collector of art and books and all sorts of things, including ashtrays. and he was involved in some kind of international discourse through the scouting movement, which is the legacy of the Americans, and Asian sports. No? So I always locate the programs in the museum in the context of the biography. So the social context is mediated by a specific biography. So I'd like to do that because I didn't want some kind of general context, right? I wanted a particular sensuous context through the life, the life of the or the biography of the collector, Jorge Vargas. Yeah.
It's very, and that's a very particular kind of approach, because often a biography can be hidden behind a generality as a kind of mandate. Correct. For a wider museum. And I mean, the British Museum is based essentially on a kind of originally a private collection. I'm conscious of the time, so
yeah, sure.
Rosie, if we want to open things up to the audience, I mean, obviously there are many more questions that I have. Always.
Absolutely. I think Joe will, yeah, here we go. Well, first of all, I want to say a huge thank you. I mean, that's such a rich, there are so many directions this could go in. There's so much already being kind of unfolded and unpacked in your conversation. And it's great to see we've had a couple of questions coming through in the chat. A couple of them posted to me separately. But if people do if you have questions for Ben or Patrick or both, or general reflections that you want to share, we can kind of convey those and reframe things as questions and kind of open up the discussion a bit. So, and any questions are very welcome. Please do post them in the Q&A. The first one we've had actually, Patrick, is around the ways in which you work with artists and select artists' work, and kind of building on that. Perhaps I also thought maybe we could think about the differences when we're thinking about archives and working with histories and with archives, perhaps the difference of kind of affordances, coming back to what Ben was saying, in artistic practice and the ways in which artists might work with archives and the ways in which curators work with archives in their work, and perhaps how those things might inform one another. So really two parts of the question. First of all, how you kind of select and go about selecting your artists, but also maybe reflecting upon ways in which those artists might work with archives in relation to how you work with archives in your work.
Yeah, so I think it's best to answer it in the context of what we do at the Vargas Museum. The University Museum is intersection between it's a public institution, but because it deals with contemporary art, so it has to deal with the wider world, which includes the market, right? So I try to mediate the appropriation of the market of the, let's say, the prestige of the institution. So when I choose artists to exhibit at the Vargas, I usually invite them to work on the archives, so that it's not just any other work of the artist in the museum. It is inflected or shaped maybe subtly or directly or whatever by archival material. So this is also a chance for the museum to ventilate the archives through contemporary work. No? So yeah, so I think that's one way to answer it. That's in terms of choosing the artists. I'm interested in artists who activate the archives too, like almost organically. No? So to also maybe move away from the binary or the default methodology of exhibiting archives. No? So I'm interested in artists who are able to create conditions of pedagogical activation through maybe a furniture or through a system of activation. In the Singapore Biennale, I worked with Celine Condorelli, who produced furniture to activate the archives of 5 artists, 4 of whom were artist curators. No? So including Ray Albano. So she produced like lounging chairs or lounges, I think, and for the audience to sit on, and attached to the chairs were newspapers. No? She also designed, she worked with a designer to transform fragments of the archives into newspaper material. So the audience can read, read the archives while sitting. Now, for Celine, it was an ambiguous furniture. It could be a museological structure, but it could also be just for leisure or rest. Yeah, she wanted that ambiguity.
Yeah, I think that idea of the bringing that ambiguity and that idea of when you talked about the way that artists might ventilate the archive and bringing in those the uncertainties of that ambiguity and those kind of non-binary. Yeah, really interesting.
And there's a license there, isn't there? Mm. I mean, I think about this in terms of your work, I guess also in terms of some of Clementine Delice's work. I invite the artists, and yes, obviously it's because their practices might be very interesting, but it's also because there's a certain permission that I think it's very interesting to see that maybe people who are in more professionalized roles within institutions don't feel that they have. So in some ways, also allowing someone in to do something that maybe doesn't feel possible within the existing structure. Anyway, just a sort of side point.
Yeah, and maybe just to quick follow up, Ben. I also see curatorial work as a predisposing, that not really to impose on the artist what to do, but to predispose the artist to, to do certain things that are in a way in conversation with what the curator is doing, no? So, or what the institution is doing. So I see, because we don't have much money at the Vargas, I see the institution as predisposing, meaning to predispose artists to work with the Vargas, but also to finance the projects independently, meaning that they should be ready for the Vargas because the Vargas has predisposed them to certain things. No, so I that's a different kind of economy, because I have to work around the problem of scarcity. So I try to redistribute the potential or the values of the museum in a more creative way. And one way to do it is to create this maybe a productive use of prestige, no? As a way to predispose people to independently speak to the vision of the Vargas, but finance it, outside the institution. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but I mentioned to you, Patrick, prior to our conversation, that we'd had the opportunity to have David Tay come and speak to us this week, and he uses the idea of currencies a lot to talk to try and explain these different kind of modes of exchange that might be going on in the art world. And I think it's very interesting to think about the collection, the space collection, as a currency that can give value, confer value, but also at the same time can have value conferred on it. So I think it's really interesting what you say there. Sorry, Rosie.
One question I was going to maybe move on to is around, we've had a question in the chat about the kind of space or structure of the kind of curatorial space that publics or participants or audiences into, and maybe thinking about it from that, thinking about your work from that perspective, how you kind of think about that encounter with the work that someone might have, and how they might kind of participate or engage in some of these ideas, and that kind of, I suppose, yeah, for you, what your thinking is around the sort of interface of the archive and artistic practices and publics or participants, and how you kind of frame that in your own thinking.
Yeah. I think there's no like formula here, Rosie. It depends on also the requirements of the historical moment. No, so in the case of Singapore Biennale, I was responding to the historical moment of the bicentennial of colonial conquest in Singapore. So I wanted to complicate that, but not really to critique it head on, because I know the problems that might might generate in Singapore, and also to acknowledge that Singaporeans have a different acknowledgement of the colonial moment in their modern history. So just to create an adjacency, maybe the archive as some kind of a critical adjacency with present form or the present moment. No, so I look at the archive in that way, not really to over determine the situation with, let us say, authenticity of data or a fetish for documentation. No, so I don't. I mean, I'm not a fan of that. No, because sometimes it can go in that direction. But to be made vulnerable to by interaction. Yeah.
And I was also thinking about your thinking through that Foucault quote on the suddenness of vicinity, and that so much becomes part of that kind of encounter, that it's that kind of relational experience as well.
Yeah. To like strangers, or like strangers. Because the Biennale, for instance, is an exemplary moment of being able to be in touch with, or to be in contact with strangers, and every curator's dream is to find a larger audience for the Biennale beyond the art world. So in Singapore, for instance, I worked with a circus from Battambang in Cambodia. It's a post-genocide circus that is also a school, a community, and a business. So I wanted that imbrication. They say that biennales are circuses. So I thought to myself, maybe we should have a real one in Singapore. So I was happy that the circus was there. They performed, and there was also an archive of past performances, and also their training in the exhibition area.
But that's I mean that's, I think, a really a kind of really beautiful example of the way that you're constantly sort of interpolating traditional, perhaps also traditional sort of museological methods with forms that are going to interrupt that. And I know, for example, you pay quite a lot of attention to context of performing arts and performing art traditions in order to kind of demonstrate that the cultural can't just be kind of captured through a simple kind of museological display. And I guess in another way, within the Taiwan presentation, the forums are quite interesting devices, if you like, for the production of audience in a very specific way. This is not a general public audience that one's just hoping is going to wander through and get something. It's actually a kind of constructed dialogue. So I guess there's something quite interesting for me here about the way in which you're putting liveness and performance and kind of actualization through the presence of kind of bodies, discussion, dialogue, and performance amongst perhaps what might be seen as more kind of traditional exhibitionary moments.
Yeah, that was the vision of Singapore Biennale, Ben. I argue that it was a festival and a seminar. That there is this the festival I take from Albano, who looked at installation and exhibition in the Philippines, as stemming from childhood urges or festivals or the cycle of feasts in a Catholic town. No? So I got it from him, and of course the idea of the seminar is from Joseph Boyce, no? The permanent seminar. No? That is the ongoing seminar. So this is the Boyce Albano in a way formulation. Of course, one might disagree with Boyce, but it's there. And in fact, as part of the program in Singapore, we had a premiere of the Boyce documentary in a cinematheque that I also collaborated with, no, to show some Binali material. No? Yeah, so that this liveliness I wanted to evoke through like the circus or performances. Yeah.
We've had so many great questions, and I know that we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I'll do my best to try to bring as
yeah, sure.
One about the ways in which, as a curator and an art historian, thinking about notions of the archive and culture and the digital, and the digital as a kind of automated actions of kind of storage and erasure, and also different modes of kind of artistic and curatorial production, but how you think about your work in relation to where the digital kind of is and what it does within your thinking.
Yeah, that question I haven't really thought about in a really serious way. But the seminar of the Taiwan Pavilion, I think, benefited from this digital circulation. So we had the archive in real time, but we had this the circulation of the seminar in the internet. So that was, I think, for me interesting. I cannot really explain it at the moment, but I think initially I thought it was instructive, no, to have this interface between archival representation through artistic material, because there is also artistic material with, of course, documentation in a like a quite conventional way, and then there is this like ongoing, like cyclical, maybe seminar online that brings in more agents, no? Brings in more. I think it could be a model too. This interface between the archive and the seminar, but the seminar that is digitally mediated, no? Yeah. But also sometimes the digital mediation is embedded in the work itself of the artist, and we have that. Xia Wei Su, the Taiwanese artist in Singapore Biennale, embeds the archive in his digital work. So sometimes it is the artistic agent that offers the condition in which these forms materialize.
And it also allows this conjunction of media, as you said, to produce something of a kind of sort of archival fiction. I was thinking of Angela Su's work at the Hong Kong presentation at Venice this year, Arise, an extraordinary kind of meditation on histories, fictions, bringing together different kind of archival footage. Would be very hard to do without digital technologies to allow that kind of splicing and that kind of compilation. So I think there is something really interesting there about the way the digital does not just allow greater access to the archive, but also allows this kind of free play.
And in the case of Xia Wei Su, there is also interactivity within the phenomenological space, meaning in the site of encounter. The the audience can actually create or recreate, intervene in the production of the digital archive.
Really interesting.
Thank you both so much. I'm aware that we've come to time, and I just wanted to say huge thanks to everyone who posted questions, and there's been some fantastic ones, and we haven't had a chance to come to them all, but hopefully parts of Patrick's and Ben's discussion will have kind of spoken to some of your interests and some of your questions. And I'll hand over before we close, just Ben and Patrick, I don't know if you have any final thoughts or final comments that you wanted to share or reflect on.
Maybe Ben.
I mean, I mean, firstly, I want to say thank you, Patrick. I know that as we started talking, we went a little bit off piste from sort of what we planned a little bit. So I want to thank you for being so responsive to my naughtiness, there. But you've opened up so many different kind of avenues and things that I've only just sort of begun to think about that are really exciting. And I think that this particular way that you're interplaying with the kind of contemporary moment of the curatorial geopolitical questions around kind of the transnational and the implication of different histories within that is a really important nexus that I think really sort of demonstrates, if you like, the importance of practicing across different spaces as you are doing, and bringing, you know, historical written work in dialogue with contemporary curatorial practice in relation to the ongoing problems that collections present. So thank you so much for giving us such a insight into your practice, but I also think a kind of real window onto why we have to continue to kind of interrogate, I guess, our relationship to materials of the past in the present, why that's so valuable and important to do. And of course, I've got to say that if people didn't have all their questions answered, then why not sign up to a short course and explore them further with us? But I also thoroughly recommend following up Patrick's work and also his writing. And we've put some links in the chat. But of course, do be in contact with ourselves or with the team here at the RC. We can also provide you further links and references to Patrick's work. So thanks again, Patrick, for dialoguing with us.
And thank you, Ben, and thank you, Rosie, for the fellowship. Yeah.
Thank you so much both, and thank you everyone for attending. As I said, really fantastic to get all of your questions and comments. And we do have another in-session event next week on Thursday with Jeremy Miller from the Writing Programme here at the RCA and Ralph Ruggoff from the Hayward Gallery. So please do join us then, and there are still some places remaining on the Archives and Collections Intensive Short Course. So if you're interested, do have a look at the website for that. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you to everyone who joined us for today's in-session talk. Patrick, Ben, and Rosie, thank you very, very much for sharing your insights and expertise. If you have any additional questions or would like to connect directly with our team and the speakers, you can reach out directly using the contact information on this slide. Make sure to also check our webpage for upcoming in-session talks. Thank you for your time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Goodbye.